Volga River, spring 922 CE. The ice had broken weeks earlier, and the trading season was beginning as Ahmad ibn Fadlan arrived at the Roose encampment along the river's eastern bank. He had traveled over 4,000 kilometers from Baghdad, departing June 21, 921 CE, as part of an embassy sent by Caliph al-Muqtadir to the Volga Bulgars, who had recently converted to Islam and requested religious teachers. The journey had taken nearly a year through Persia, across the Caspian Sea, and into the vast steppes that stretched toward the northern rivers. Ibn Fadlan was the embassy's chronicler, a scholar trained to observe without judgment and record without emotion. What he would witness during his weeks among the Roose would fill 11 pages of his manuscript. The Risala, an account so detailed and so disturbing that it would be dismissed as impossible exaggeration for nearly 1,000 years. The Roose fascinated him immediately. They were traders from Scandinavia who had established permanent settlements along the Volga to facilitate commerce between the Norse world and the Islamic caliphates. They brought furs, slaves, amber, and honey south. They took silver, silk, and spices north. Ibn Fadlan described them as the most perfect physical specimens I have ever seen, tall as date palms, blonde and ruddy, but also as the filthiest of God's creatures, sharing, washing water, and performing bodily functions without shame. His observations were clinical, but not without judgment. He was a Muslim from Baghdad, the intellectual capital of the world in the 10th century, home to the House of Wisdom, where scholars translated Greek philosophy and advanced mathematics and astronomy. The Roose, by contrast, were pagans who worshipped wooden idols carved with human faces and practiced customs that Ibn Fadlan found incomprehensible. But he wrote it all down. That was his job. And what he wrote during the spring of 922 CE would preserve details of Viking funeral ritual that no other source contains. A Roose chieftain died in late April while Ibn Fadlan was present at the encampment. The man's death set in motion a sequence of events that would culminate in the most detailed eyewitness account of human sacrifice from the Viking Age. The chieftain's body was placed in a temporary grave immediately after death, a pit dug into the still cold earth, covered with boards to protect it from scavenging animals and the warming spring air that accelerated decomposition. The funeral preparations would require 10 days. During that time, the Roose worked constantly, sewing elaborate funeral garments from imported silk and brocade, constructing the wooden framework that would support the funeral pyre, gathering firewood, slaughtering and preparing animals for sacrifice, and assembling everything the chieftain would need to maintain his status in the afterlife. But the most crucial preparation involved a human sacrifice. Ibn Fadlan recorded the selection process with evident fascination. When a great man died, his slaves were asked, "Who among you will die with him?" The question was posed as an honor. To die with one's master was to guarantee passage to the afterlife, to escape the miserable existence of slavery for eternal service in a glorious realm. A young woman volunteered. Ibn Fadlan did not record her name because she had none. That mattered. She was property, identifiable only by her function and her fate. He estimated her age as late teens or early 20s. She had served in the chieftain's household and would now serve him forever. The moment she volunteered, there was no mechanism for withdrawal. The commitment was absolute and irreversible. From that moment until her death 10 days later, her life belonged to the ritual. And the ritual had very specific requirements that Ibn Fadlan documented, with uncomfortable precision. The girl's transformation began immediately. She was given fine clothes to wear, silk garments imported from the south, jewelry of silver and amber, boots of soft leather. She was given alcohol, fermented mare's milk, called kumis, whenever she wanted it, and she drank constantly. Ibn Fadlan used the word joyful to describe her demeanor during those 10 days. She sang, she laughed. She showed no fear or hesitation or regret. 2 other slave girls were assigned to attend her, following her everywhere, serving her every need, watching her at all times. The slave had become a mistress, elevated above her former status, treated as a person of importance for the first and only time in her life. But this elevation came with requirements. Each evening after sunset, the girl was taken to the tents of the chieftain's closest companions and relatives. Ibn Fadlan recorded what happened in those tents with carefully chosen language that conveyed his discomfort. Each man lay with her while she was held by attendants. When he finished, he spoke specific ritual words directly to her. "Tell your master that I did this out of love for him." Ibn Fadlan recorded this phrase because it was repeated identically by each man, on each night, a formula that transformed what was happening into an act of devotion to the dead chieftain rather than use of the girl's body. She was not being violated for the men's pleasure. The ritual insisted she was carrying messages to the afterlife. Each encounter was a message of loyalty that she would deliver when she arrived in paradise to join her master. This continued for 10 consecutive nights. Different tents, different men, same ritual words. Ibn Fadlan noted that she continued to drink heavily throughout the 10 days, remaining in a state of near constant intoxication. Whether the alcohol was provided to maintain her compliant state, or whether she sought it desperately to endure what was being done to her, his account does not clarify. The spring weather grew warmer as the days progressed. The chieftain's body, retrieved periodically from its temporary grave for preparation, had begun to decompose despite the cool earth. Ibn Fadlan noted that the corpse had turned black, which disturbed him, though the Roose seemed unconcerned. What mattered was not the body's appearance, but the spirit's release. And that release required elaborate ritual performance. On the 10th day, the preparations were complete. The ship that would carry the chieftain had been dragged from the Volga onto land and positioned on a massive wooden platform that would serve as the funeral pyre. The vessel was approximately 20 meters long, a trading ship rather than a warship, now transformed into a vehicle for the journey to the afterlife. A tent had been constructed on the ship's deck, furnished with cushions and coverings imported from Byzantium. Inside this tent, the chieftain's body was positioned in a seated posture, dressed in the funeral garments that had been sewn during the 10-day preparation trousers of fine wool, a tunic of silk brocade fastened with gold buttons, boots of soft leather, a caftan lined with sable fur. Weapons were placed within his reach, a sword with silver inlay on the hilt, several knives, a bow with arrows. Food was arranged beside him, bread made from wheat flour, roasted meat from a freshly slaughtered cow, onions, and several jars of fermented drink. Everything a wealthy man might need for a long journey through unknown territory. The animal sacrifices came next. Ibn Fadlan listed them with characteristic precision, 2 horses driven until they were sweating and exhausted, then killed with sword strikes to the neck, a rooster and a hen, their necks wrung, a dog, stabbed through the heart, a cow. Throat cut and blood drained into wooden bowls. The Roose believed these creatures would accompany their master, their spirits released to serve him in the afterlife, just as they had served him in life. The spring morning had grown hot by the time the girl's final ritual began. She had been drinking since dawn, consuming cup after cup of kumis brought by her attendant slave girls. Ibn Fadlan observed her moving through the camp, visiting the tents of various families, performing what he described as farewells. She seemed cheerful, singing the same songs she had sung for 10 days, showing no apparent awareness that these were her final hours of life. Near the ship, the Roose had constructed a wooden door frame, 2 posts driven into the soft spring ground with a lintel across the top. It stood alone, leading nowhere, framing nothing but air and the pale morning sky. The girl was brought to this structure by several men who lifted her bodily until she was level with the lintel, high enough to see over the top. They held her there for several seconds, then lowered her. They repeated this action 3 times, and each time she was raised, she spoke. Ibn Fadlan's interpreter translated her words. The first time, she said, "I see my father and my mother." The second time, she said, "I see all my dead relatives sitting." The third time, she said, "I see my master sitting in paradise. Paradise is green and beautiful. With him are men and young servants. He is calling me. Let me go to him." Whether she actually saw these visions is unknowable. She had been drinking heavily for 10 days. She had been told repeatedly that paradise awaited her. She had been conditioned through ritual and intoxication to see whatever the ceremony demanded. The doorframe was a threshold between worlds in Norse belief, a boundary where the living could glimpse the realm of the dead. The girl saw her master calling. She asked to be taken to him. What happened next would grant that request. The girl was led to the ship and helped aboard onto the deck where the tent containing her master's body had been erected. At the tent's entrance stood the woman Ibn Fadlan, called the Angel of Death, an old woman, large and thick-bodied with a dark, grim face, who had supervised the entire 10-day preparation period. This was a hereditary role, passed from woman to woman. A female priestess of death in a society otherwise dominated by male warriors and chieftains,